I'll say good morning, good afternoon out there. I can see all the attendees starting to come in. Welcome. We're going to get started in a moment or two. I see some familiar faces too.
Michelle Daly, hello.
Yes, some familiar names. Okay, I'm going to give it about another 20 seconds. Chris, I don't know if the poll question is up quite yet. Our view is a little bit different from what everybody else has, I think.
They should be. Let me see if people are starting to answer.
All right. Well, there's two quick poll questions up just to give us a sense of things as we get started. So if you could go ahead and take those, we'll give you a little bit of time to do that while we are doing introductions. So Catherine, should we get started?
Yes, absolutely. Well,
Okay.
It is good morning or good afternoon, everyone. It is a great pleasure to present with my extraordinary colleague and friend, Mary Schaefer. Mary is someone I've known for over a decade now, we just realized. And she started her career in the military, in the Army's Judge Advocate General Corps, and she served as a prosecutor, a command legal advisor, and then an instructor of constitutional and military law at the U.S. Military Academy. And then after a stint at the State Department, she joined the FBI, and that's where we first met she joined in 2010 and we met in 2011. And she was the manager and compliance officer for the FBI's Office of Integrity and Compliance that I now lead. And I met her when I was in a different capacity at the FBI. And knowing what an amazing job Mary had done at the FBI, when there was a new administrator at the DEA who had come from the FBI, he immediately sought to have Mary come over and establish the program at the DEA. So she is the DEA's chief compliance officer and their very first chief compliance officer. She joined in June of 2016. And so I'm really happy to present with her today.
Thanks, Catherine. And I have the pleasure of introducing Catherine. Catherine Sheehan-Bruno is the Assistant Director and Chief Ethics and Compliance Officer and within FBI's Office of Integrity and Compliance at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. Catherine started her career as an assistant U.S. attorney for within the District of Columbia, and worked on domestic violence, arson, wire fraud, and gun trafficking conspiracy cases. She then moved over to serve as investigative counsel and a deputy assistant inspector general within the Department of Justice's Office of the Inspector General. And so she was there from 2002 to 2009, and then moved over to FBI, where she served as special counsel to the general counsel on matters pertaining to OIG and GAO reviews, so those external audits that every federal agency loves to receive. And that is where I got to meet, where I first met Catherine, because at that time, the Office of the Inspector General, the DOJ OIG was actually auditing FBI's compliance program, as it was sort of a fledgling program. We were a couple of years into it, and that was one of the first projects that I got to work on when I joined FBI. And so, yes, I departed in 2016, and by that time, Catherine had joined the Office of Integrity and Compliance. And in 2018, she took the helm and has been the assistant director and head of that office ever since. So we would love to welcome everybody to this session. It's great to see so many attendees, and I'm going to move us into our agenda here. Okay, so let me actually stop first. Chris, do we have some poll results?
For the first question, are you government, private sector, or education / nonprofit? 31% are government, 46% private sector, 23% education nonprofit. And then for how would you describe the current developmental stage of your program? 8% crawling, 50% walking, and 42% running.
Nice. That's a really nice breakdown.
Okay.
Well, okay, I will. So I thought it might be a little bit helpful to start with a little bit of sort of why the title, why taking our own medicine. It's a little bit of play on words. I work for the Drug Enforcement Administration. We deal in pharmaceuticals, but it is really sort of an effort on our part to acknowledge that we in the federal space have sort of done the work of the federal sentencing guidelines and the guidance that all of you who are in the private sector use to administer your programs, that we use to regulate you. And yet we haven't been so great over the years at taking our own medicine, at implementing these programs for ourselves. And some of that has sort of changed in recent years, but this is really our effort. This talk is our sort of combined efforts to implement those programs for ourselves. So we have up here sort of as a sort of a thumbnail sketch, the federal sentencing guidelines, the OIG guidance on this, some sort of key words and key sort of concepts that come from those. And then I'll hand it to Catherine to give us a little bit of an overview for those of you who aren't familiar with the OMB circular on enterprise risk management.
Okay. So the OMB circular on enterprise risk management really was one of the foundational documents to mandate that all federal agencies have a program such as the one that had been started in 2007 at the FBI and subsequent to that in many other places in the government, and as noted in 2016 at the DEA. So it was really the overall federal government's effort to ensure that risk in a variety of ways at one of the four categories of risk in OMB circular A123 is legal compliance risk, which is what Mary and I generally focus on, and to ensure that that category of risk, among others, was something that would drive federal activities, including budget and resources and other things of that nature. So we're still in the nascent stages, honestly, of implementing OMB A123, but we're really driving towards a risk-based approach.
Yeah, sorry, I was a little too quick fingered on that.
That's fine.
Slideshow. So what's our plan for today? We are hoping that this is quite conversational across the two of us and with all of you. Please feel free to sort of drop your questions into the chat. Chris is going to be kind enough to prompt us when a question comes in, and we'll try and prompt each other. But this is really sort of an opportunity for us to describe how we built the organizations that we built, the offices that we built, some lessons learned along the way. But I don't want to give the impression that this is intended to be really sort of for a federal audience. This is intended on our part to recognize that starting these programs is hard. And whether you're starting in the federal sector or in the private sector, I think a lot of the lessons are the same. And so hopefully this will be of value to you if you are in that sort of crawl, crawl to walk stage, as I sort of think that my program still is, candidly. And it will just be an opportunity for us to kind of share what we're learning along the way and maybe learn from you as well. So let's talk a little bit about the DOJ 2020 guidance.
Great. Thank you, Mary. So one of the founding documents for the Department of Justice that actually applies very broadly, as all of you will know who are in the private sector and the public sector, is the guidance on compliance programs. And in order to evaluate for sentencing guidelines purposes whether or not a program is of the caliber that it should be, the DOJ has issued guidance, and it really focuses on 6 primary areas. So in 2007, when we started our program, we focused on these areas And as we all know, and you've heard undoubtedly many times, it all starts with tone at the top, leadership commitment. Both of our programs, and you'll hear a little bit more about how we recognize that policies and procedures are foundational elements. And then you implement your policies and procedures, or you make those a reality by ensuring that there's awareness and training on what people need to be doing. And then, as I mentioned before, that risk should be driving efforts. And then, of course, accountability cannot be obtained without monitoring and auditing. And then, of course, we all have, as a necessary element, is a reporting structure for individuals to come forward with concerns. So those are the elements that we started with and that drove our initial efforts. Okay, so I'll take the next portion of the presentation and go through some of the FBI specifics, starting with our origins, the gaps that were identified in our organization, some of the decisions about how our program would be designed, our current structure, and then I guess as we are walking, and maybe walking a little more swiftly than we were before and trying to hit our stride with a run, things that we feel that we need to do to improve our programs, which may well be universal to all of us. So the FBI in 2007 experienced what many, both in the private sector and public sector, experience, which is a really challenging moment. Our Inspector General's office, where I was actually working at the time, issued a series of reports about the FBI's handling, in particular, of national security letters, a kind of national security type of subpoena that had been authorized through the Patriot Act. And it was determined that there was massive non-compliance on a number of different levels. And it wasn't just one IG report, it was sort of a series of reports. And it came on the heels of a number of other matters that had been raised in different contexts that really went to our reputation and credibility as law enforcers if we were not going to be following the law as we should. So Director Mueller at the time and Valerie Caproni, who's pictured here before Congress, and the IG Glenn Fine was my boss at the time. Valerie Caproni and others at the FBI and Director Mueller determined that based on their experience in viewing private sector programs from their work in the SEC and other places, that the FBI should have a compliance program. And so they established the Office of Integrity and Compliance. That was also the same time they established a corporate policy office and made a number of changes. So the first thing they did is look at, okay, where are we and where could we improve? And they determined that there were a lot of gaps in how the FBI was handling compliance. There was already an existing division called the Office of Inspections that conducted inspections of field offices on a periodic basis, that handled misconduct allegations. There was an Office of Professional Responsibility that handled discipline once matters had been investigated by inspection, but there wasn't really a compliance program per se. So they determined that we really were not identifying legal compliance risks in a proactive way. We weren't directing analysis of those risks, and we really didn't have any plans to address risk in a methodical way in terms of technology, program modifications, policy, training, monitoring, auditing. We just didn't have anything like that. And there was really inconsistent policies across the FBI in terms of monitoring programs. So, so we determined that it would be appropriate to start a compliance program. And so we had to make some decisions about what is the scope of the program going to be and how is it going to be structured. So the way the office was set forth is they determined, and this is somewhat unique, I guess, to the FBI, not all compliance officers are like this, but they decided to put both the ethics program, which had been in the General Counsel's office, and a newly created compliance program, a brand new compliance program in the same office. And what's interesting about that is, as you can see here, we both model and encourage ethical behavior, and we promote a culture of compliance. What I found, it's very interesting, and they're extremely complementary missions, because if individuals feel that they're both supported and held to account to make ethical decisions with respect to their own personal conduct through the standards of conduct with gifts and disclosures and conflicts and all those things that apply to us as individuals. And at the same time, if they feel that, then they're, in my experience, more likely to hold the institution to account for compliance, and vice versa. If individuals see that the institution doesn't cut corners and flout the rules and sort of take liberties, then they're more likely to feel that that's the culture of the place and that they should go ahead and get ethics advice and follow ethical rules. So they're really very much complementary and mutually reinforcing. At present, I'm the assistant director. We have an ethics unit chief that's a total of 8 individuals with 5 attorneys, 2 analysts, and a unit chief. And then we have 12 individuals on the compliance side with a unit chief, 2 special agents, FBI special agents, 6 attorneys, and 3 analysts. So that really means that we have 1 attorney per branch of the FBI, which is thinly staffed, and you'll see how we work, what we do with that thin staffing. Because if you think about it, like just one branch of the FBI has the counterterrorism division, the counterintelligence division, and the weapons of mass destruction division, and the terrorist screening center. So that's just one branch, and that's 1 attorney who handles that. So we're thinly staffed. I would also say it's important to note, I'm going to focus on our risk identification and mitigation process, because that's sort of at the heart of what our compliance unit does. But there are all of these other sub-programs that we manage. We do ethics advice and approvals on the ethics side, and there we manage our core values program and our core values awards. We also serve on numerous internal committees for Institutional Review Board for research on human subjects, the AI Ethics Council. We have a lot of internal coordination because, as I said, we have different divisions doing roles that are traditionally part of the compliance program at other places, like internal investigations. So there's a ton of internal coordination that has to go on. We also manage the enterprise risk management program. We conduct benchmarking with the private sector, and we are involved with external partnerships. One of them I think is really worth mentioning in this space. Mary will not be surprised. The FBI leads an organization called the Federal Working Group of Compliance Professionals, or the Working Group of Federal Compliance Professionals. Let's get that confused. And it's actually ECI is supporting us in that effort. And Mary and I are both on the steering committee. And the purpose of that group is really to just provide a forum for those involved in federal government compliance programs to share best practices and support each other. So if that's something you all have any curiosity about, please feel free. We have our contact information at the end, and you're welcome to reach out to us about that. So in addition to structuring the program as we did, we determined that there was a really important decision to be made. Some compliance programs focus on a particular aspect. There may be a compliance program for safety or a compliance program for different aspects of an organization's operations. At the outset, it was determined that our compliance program would cover all compliance risks across all the activities of the FBI, operational, administrative, all of them. So it's not that we have just a focus in one particular area. In addition, the way we structured, and I think initially it was 3 times a year, Mary, I don't know how you survived that, but our process now functions on a twice a year.
I think it was 4.
4. That's a lot. That's a lot. So we've gotten a rhythm of twice a year, and the way it's structured is there's a little calendar on the right, and there's no need to really see the details of that. It's just for illustrative purposes. So the black diamond represents the meetings, the compliance committee meetings that are held at the division level, and that means all 56 field divisions, field offices, which are all around the country, plus the 22 headquarters divisions of the FBI. So in January and February, each of those led by the division head, which is usually an assistant director or a special agent in charge, will have a committee, and their job is to identify risk, analyze risk, mitigate risk. And so that division level is happening in January and February. Then at the branch level, which is really focused on headquarters, we have 6 branches, and we have a branch committee meeting in the month of March primarily. And what happens there is the executive assistant director of the branch is really focusing on the risks throughout all of the divisions of the branch. And then in April, we have a meeting with the director of the FBI. He runs the Integrity and Compliance Council. And at that meeting, all of the executive assistant directors of all the branches, plus others, the general counsel, all the compliance functions, myself, the inspection division, professional responsibility, and now our brand new Office of Internal Audit, which just started. We all meet together and we go throughout all the risks of the FBI, focusing primarily on those that are the highest priority risks. We have tier 1 risks at the enterprise level, which are selected by the director, tier 2 selected by EADs, and then tier 3 at the division level. And then there's sort of a catch-all tier 4. And as Mary knows, those are always the fun ones because no one owns those except us. But we did need a catch-all to cover some things that really don't fit into one of the other branches. And then in the summer, towards the end of the summer, we begin the process all over again. And what we found with this process is the way it's structured is that risks are really being pushed up as they need to be. If a risk really arises at one of the division meetings, but it doesn't seem like it really can be addressed within that division, it can be pushed up the following month to the branch meeting. And then at the branch meetings, we can figure out what really should be pushed up to the tier 1 director level. And what the other benefit of this, it's really good, is that every manager in the FBI, essentially, by the time they make, they're in the senior executive service and an assistant special agent in charge or a section chief, they are attending these meetings starting from when they're at the division level. So by the time they get to be a division director and then an EAD, they really understand how the process works. And it's a really beneficial approach, I think, to how to go about it. I want to talk for a minute about we've talked a lot about the general structure of the program. For a minute, I want to get into the nitty gritty of how we make this happen. So the real focus is identification of risk. As I mentioned, we have 1 attorney per branch. So we cannot be figuring out what the risks should be, how they should be resolved. That's really not something we can do with the resources that we have. So the way this program works is we're really the catalyst in the chemical reaction, but it only works because we are driving a process that the managers and the experts within the FBI are in fact causing to happen. So we have this mitigation plan template that we use for almost all risks. And it really is a question of bringing together, once a risk is identified and prioritized by the division head, EAD, or the director, to bring those experts together from all stakeholder divisions to get them into a room and to have them really focus on what needs to be. First of all, let's analyze this risk. Okay, so I've skipped over that a little bit. The analysis products take a lot of different forms, but first take a look at the risk. What is the law? What is the training? What is the policy? Look at that control environment. And then once the gaps are identified, apply those gaps to a simple template. What do we need to do? Who's going to handle it? When's it going to be done? And we use these colors to really drive management focus. So at a division meeting, a branch meeting, or the director's meeting, as we go through the risk, green means this task or this risk overall is on target. It's moving along, and we're happy with the progress. Yellow, and these are selected by me, the compliance chief. Yellow means we've hit some road bumps and we're a little bit behind schedule, or we've gotten stuck somewhere. Red means we're off the rails. And what this does is it really focuses attention for managers looking through the book, which are the risks that really need my attention. And it's just a really good way of going about it that I did not think of. But I do recall that when Mary left, we gave her a large box of crayons because she has the power of the crayons, is how we say at the FBI.
I still have those crayons.
You still have those crayons. And I don't want to go over for too long, but I will just provide one example of a risk that was described by the OIG in that report that Mary mentioned. And I think it's a good example for us. It was determined that we had a backlog of DNA samples at the FBI, and that creates compliance risk in a number of ways because of our obligation to analyze those samples and put them into databases so that if a person is arrested and they've committed a prior crime, that we can find those individuals in our DNA index system. So that backlog was a serious matter. It was raised as a compliance risk early on in our program. And through this process, all the people who needed to come together came together, a mitigation plan was developed, and within a few years, the backlog was eliminated, thereby eliminating the compliance risk. And what's great about that is that we really, it was proactive, right? It was getting out ahead, not waiting for someone to come to the FBI and say, oh, here's a problem, you need to fix it, and here's how to fix it, and here's what we think. It was really the FBI doing it in their own time with their own resources. So I think that's one of the great things about the way this program is structured. And it seems, it sometimes is stressful to have so really limited resources, but it forces us to use the individuals in the divisions and the experts, and we get buy-in as a result. So I think do I have one more slide? Yeah. So what is our focus going forward for the future? We currently have this consistent cycle. I do think we're at a run, we're at a fast walk probably. We have a consistent cycle that I just described and a robust ethics program. We provide over 2,200 pieces of written advice on any given year. We have the workforce participating, and we have leadership reinforcing the culture. But what we really need to do at this point is, as I mentioned, we have these disparate divisions that handle compliance aspects of the FBI, and we really need more coordination. So we're trying to build a seamless, integrated program. We also rely a lot on anecdote, and we need to focus on data. And then finally, we can do more. We can always do more to really ingrain ethics and compliance into the culture, in particular on the compliance side, to really help those managers understand it is not someone else's job to come in and find out if there's non-compliance in your program. It is your job. At every level, you as a manager must be looking to see where there could be non-compliance. So that's the direction we're looking at towards the future. And I'll turn it over to Mary to tell us about the phenomenal program that she's established at DEA.
Great, thank you. I hope everybody's doing well and enjoying the presentation. It's nice to see just so many participants on the line. So I, as Catherine indicated, I started my compliance journey at the FBI. I was at the FBI for 6 years, and so it will not surprise anyone that that is sort of the foundation for my program as well. As I got the opportunity to move over to DEA. DEA, not dissimilar from FBI's origin story or from many of your origin stories. It is often born of a bit of a moment in time where the agency had to take stock of kind of the direction that it was headed, of the challenges that we were facing. And for DEA, it was a combination of a couple of sort of not great moments. And so at the time, the chief of staff at FBI, a gentleman named Chuck Rosenberg, was asked to come over to DEA and to serve as acting administrator at DEA. He had experienced FBI's compliance program, and he saw the value in having a compliance program in federal agencies. And so he sort of put together a task force, I understand, when he got there, and that resulted in a job posting that I applied for. And so that was kind of how I moved over. And he was wonderful in that he recognized the value of FBI's program and what it brought to the table, but also was very kind in giving me a bit of a blank sheet of paper. And just some sort of broad brush, guardrails and expectations, but said, I want you to build a program for this agency. And for those of you who are familiar with our two components, they are both law enforcement components. DEA has both a law enforcement, drug enforcement mandate, as well as a regulatory mandate. For those of you who are involved on sort of the healthcare compliance side of the house, you're probably far more familiar with us on that side, because we regulate registrants, those who have prescription writing authorities. And we sort of regulate that closed system that is the distribution network of prescription, certain scheduled prescription drugs. And so it is sort of an agency that has whereas FBI's mission, I would say, is very broad and crosses a number of different areas. DEA's mission is very discrete. And while there is a lot of overlap between these two organizations, they both have very unique identities, very unique cultures, and they're both very proud of those cultures. And so one of my challenges was to kind of figure out what that culture was. And I'll tell you sort of candidly, sort of first lesson that I had to learn was, do not expect to pick this up and drop this here and think you're going to be okay. I think it's going to work. There was both sort of a welcoming environment. There was a real hunger for this, I found, in talking to my new colleagues, a real hunger for a place where they could go to identify their risks and their challenges and their concerns about how the agency was doing in exercising its mission. And so that was wonderful. And yet at the same time, there was a real sense of, hey, just so you know, new kid, we're not the FBI, we're different. And that was just important for me. That was sort of a real, from a personality perspective, useful for me to hear, but also in building my program, useful for me to recognize that was going to mean that I was going to have to meet this organization where it was and spend a lot of time listening to what the needs might be. And so as I kind of identified the gaps, there were a couple of areas that really sort of stood out. And one was that, not dissimilar to sort of where FBI had found itself, we were in reactive mode. We were reacting to the headlines. We were reacting to the things that arise, whether they came from an OIG review, whether they came from sort of an act of misconduct on the part of an employee, but it was highly reactive and sort of one of my goals was to start to build a program that could be more proactive, more systemic in its analysis of how we were approaching a given issue. And so that is sort of what the compliance function could bring to the table. Candidly, it's something that to me, that number one thing, sort of one of my first observations, is something that we continue to work on, is moving us from a reactive place to a proactive place, or maybe the ability to sort of be both at all times, both react and be proactive wherever possible. We, like FBI, we did not have a compliance analysis function. We had many of the pillars of what I believe are sort of and having spent many years in these organizations and these compliance organizations, recognize that. So we had an audit function, but it was a standalone function. It is still a standalone function. We have what we call Office of Professional Responsibility. That office investigates employee misconduct. We have an equal opportunity function, but all of these are very separate and discrete. And so one of my first tasks was figuring out where the gaps were. Catherine, I think you said it really well, the ability to sort of provide a space where we could analyze, so not only sort of, if we were finding a systemic problem in an audit, to be able to take that and say, why is this happening over and over and over again? And there really was no space to do that. And so as we built our compliance function, that was really kind of one of the first partnerships that we sought to establish, was that relationship with our audit teams that were already at DEA, so that we could be the recipients of those trends that they were noticing. And I'll speak a little bit of that in a few minutes, but that is kind of really an area that that we're spending a lot of time on right now, and I'm really excited about it. One of the first real sort of compliance challenges that we discovered is that DEA really lacked a centralized policy office. And so policy in DEA was sort of scattered across individual division web internal, like what I'll call intranet pages. It was an extraordinarily cumbersome process. It was very paper-based. Literally, packets of paper were moving around divisions with looking for signatures. And so what that meant as sort of as a compliance officer was that if you can't even find the policy, how can I expect you to follow it? And so we really had to kind of start there. And I see in our list of participants, I see a number of members of the policy team, to include Catherine Quinn. I'm going to call you out, Catherine, who ran our policy section for several years. And so, and this was a real sort of effort on our part. So I would sort of say one of our first compliance projects was getting a true policy function up and running for the agency that would both put everything in one place, that was searchable, and that created a process whereby the right people were reviewing policy at the right times, and then getting it published in a way that folks could find it in a timely fashion. Because it's sort of, really the challenge that we had was a little bit like if everyone has sort of different iterations of a manuscript, right? You're all sort of on the same story, but you're not necessarily getting the latest draft. And so this is very much intended to sort of write that piece. The other thing that we found was that, and this is, I'll sort of come back to it again in a few moments, is our auditing process has been very cumbersome, in the sense that our own internal, so those inspectors, those auditors for DEA who go out and audit DEA offices, have sort of voiced over the years that this is a pretty cumbersome process for them, and the cycle that we've created does not net particularly current results, and I'll come to that in just a moment. And then finally, sort of the last piece was a gap that I didn't candidly identify, but one of our acting administrators in sort of post Mr. Rosenberg identified, which was that we had an audit liaison function, which was a function that sort of a group of people that would interact and manage the OIG audit process. So when our external auditors come in, there is a team that navigates that process and ensures that they get access to the right people to interview, that they get the right documents. And that process was moved over to work under the Office of Compliance. And I'll speak a minute about how that was just a really valuable sort of initiative that one of our former administrators did. So what's our design? It won't surprise you, like FBI's program, we report directly to our front office. Our front office consists of the administrator, a deputy administrator, and what is currently called sort of our senior advisor for business operations. So essentially, we have an operations deputy and a business operations deputy. And so we report directly to them. I meet with the senior advisor for business operations throughout the week, but formally at least every other week. And we produce everything from from an annual report to our compliance risk analyses. All of our policy is signed by the front office. All of these things march their way up to the front office for that official signature and input. We've built a policy office that supports the policy function for DEA. Our compliance risk analysis and mitigation functions are not dissimilar from the way Catherine described hers. We conduct compliance analyses at the request of much in a very similar tiered fashion. They can come from the front office, they can come from the field, and frequently do. And then I can also self-identify and raise issues. We do a similar banding of those threats. We ask a series of impact, all of those types of questions that most of you are used to asking as part of the course of your analysis and risk mitigation efforts. And I'll and what I'll say, as we identify these risks, we in a very similar fashion, we have members of our team who will lead that risk analysis effort. And so as each potential project is identified, as each compliance risk is identified, we will sit down and say, who are the stakeholders that need to be around the table with us? And we always ensure that there is somebody from our Office of General Counsel at the table to advise us on that legal issue, as well as the true SMEs who have to live it and breathe it every day. That ensures that we are asking the right questions and thinking about it the right way, but it also ensures that buy-in on the part of those that have to live with it. And then as we look out to our employee population, we have tried to build essentially career-long training. This is candidly an area where I think we have a lot of work to do, and it's something that we've internally been talking about ways to improve this. The pandemic did not help this. It was a real challenge for us to reach our employees in this way. I used to be like a bit of a traveling roadshow along with a couple other of my colleagues. And so we have tried to think about ways to get back to that. I'll again put a pin in this partnership with our auditing functions. But like many of you, we've created both confidential, a variety of ways that employees across the organization can reach us. They can call a helpline where they can reach out to us. We have an email box. We have employees across the organization who can receive and push concerns. Gratefully, and I think probably a sign of a healthy, robust culture, folks do not have a problem picking up the phone and calling us. We get, and that's probably a sign of folks who feel comfortable identifying risks and issues. So this is our current structure. You'll notice that we're a little bit different from the FBI structure. We are similar in that we have that first section there is a compliance section. So that's a team of folks. So that's about 8 folks who work in there. Here, where we went a little bit of a different path. One of the messages that I heard right away in my travels out to the field was, why do you only have attorneys and agents in this? We have a number of other what we call core series. We have diversion investigators, those folks who are involved in that regulation of the pharmaceutical process and industry. And we have intelligence research specialists who participate, and we have chemists who work at our labs. And so over time, we've built these bridges with those other core divisions at DEA, and it has been, oh gosh, it's been fantastic because for a variety of reasons, not the least of which is you have a true SME sitting in the office, somebody who has lived this as a career. And brings that wealth of information to the table. When you're talking through a compliance risk, you need somebody who really understands how that works. They also come with their connections, right? They have their own colleagues out in the field. And the unanticipated benefit that I just didn't think through is we all solve problems differently. And they really bring that background to the table. And ask questions differently and answer things differently and solve problems differently. And that has been just a real benefit to us as, and so what we've learned is that while you may be the chemist in the office, you may not necessarily be assigned to work on the lab's projects. You may be that just in-house SME. But I may sort of ask that the chemist in the office to work on something entirely different, because I just want you to sort of take that different problem solving skill and bring it to bear somewhere else. We have the policy shop that I described a bit ago, and that shop does everything from sort of manage our records function to the, like, what I'll call sort of making the sausage of policy, which is, you know, cumbersome and frustrating, but because it sits in-house, we can make sure that that the policy is prioritized the right way, and that it's a sort of thorough, and we can sort of keep it up to date. And that office has the sort of unenviable duty of having partnerships across the agency and sort of nudging those folks along who may have to put pen to paper and make that policy happen. The external audit function is the function that manages those relationships with OIG and GAO. We've got just a phenomenal team there that has really kind of taken this, what is already kind of, sort of, I'll say sort of the administrative side of this house is the side of the house that has to make sure that we are responsive, that we give the OIG and GAO access to documents and that they're able to come in and be good auditors to us. But the other side of having this team in-house is that what is the OIG auditing? They're auditing our compliance, right? And so as an auditor comes in and as an audit kicks off, we're able to then bring in folks from the compliance side, from the policy side, to say, let's look at this alongside the IG. And to the extent that we can start to fix the issues now, let's not wait for the report to come out. Let's go ahead and do that. And we've had a lot of success there in identifying issues early on, in rewriting our policies to the point that as the OIG report is coming out, we are asking for closure of recommendations upon issuance of the report, which is pretty exciting stuff for us. I'm geeking out on this compliance and policy stuff. So that's pretty exciting for us to be able to do that. And then the last piece is really sort of a new mandate from our new administrator. So many of you may not know, but our agency had not had a confirmed administrator for something like 6 years. And so that was challenging for us. When you have, as many of you with your own organizations, if you have a CEO, a lot of CEO turnover, it's a little bit difficult to figure out which direction you want the ship to go in. And so we finally have a confirmed administrator, and she is very big on leveraging data to get out ahead of problems. And that's just exciting for us, right? To have that somebody who cares so much about that is something that we're able to leverage in our office. And so we're building two things in that section. And one of them is a function that candidly we've lacked in DEA, which is a planning function. So as a new initiative comes up, this team's role and responsibility is to get involved early on and work with stakeholders to design and implement a plan so that everybody kind of sort of has essentially an action sheet and a checklist. It's project management. And sort of the ability to do that at the front end. It helps me as the compliance officer because I can start to build in those compliance principles along the way and not as sort of an afterthought once it's built. And then the other thing that we're doing is working on what our administrator calls sort of early warning detection, which is to better leverage our data to build in functions for program managers across DEA so that they can manage and be true active program managers in real time. Many of our program management functions at our headquarters level are currently very transactional. They are processing the paperwork that allows somebody to go overseas, but they're not in a position to have a sense of where might that process be going awry, or if there is a challenge there, how do they issue spot that and elevate it? And so part of this is to put those tools in their hands. So these are our current projects: data analytics, really formalizing a strategic planning process, and a true project planning process. Modernizing our audit processes. We're currently involved in a process with our internal Office of Inspections to just kind of completely revamp it and turn this into sort of near-time, real-time data, as opposed to audit reports that might come in 2-3 years. You haven't been to that field office to interview to audit them in 2-3 years time. We're trying to do that in a more current time. And then I think the other thing we need to work on is that post-COVID sort of getting back out to the field and building those connections. We are currently very connected, what I will call sort of at my level, at an executive to executive level. We have a great rapport with the field and executives. But something that we talk frequently about is that we need to sort of make sure that all employees have access to us and know who we are and know how to reach us and understand what we do. So I think I hit a lot of those already. So let's sort of bring this back to sort of the two of us. And I guess I'll sort of ask you, Catherine, and I'll as you answer, I'll look in the chat to see if anybody has raised any questions. But I'd love to know sort of your observations in your program of how Tone at the Top has impacted your program and how valuable it's been for you.
Well, it's a really interesting question. And I think it highlights the fact that every organization is unique. So as you described, not having a permanent administrator for 6 years, we have directors who generally are very stable for a period of up to 10 years, sometimes longer. And so at that level, we have a lot of stability. But what happens is the second in command, the third in command, the deputy and the associate deputy, and the executive assistant directors, most of the assistant directors, they're all agents who have a 20-year retirement ability, who are mandatory to retire at 57, and who oftentimes are reaching those levels in the organization when they're very close to retirement. So we have just constant turnover in the ADs, the EADs, the SACs. So that's why it's all the more important for us. If we want to have the Tone at the Top, we have to start really early. So division compliance officers are assistant special agents in charge. We have to really indoctrinate them into this, really buying into the notion that the FBI's mission is two parts. It's protecting the American public while upholding the Constitution. And the compliance is really that sort of uphold the Constitution and be in compliance with the law, and also uphold that others are in compliance with the law. So that's what we really have to start early on. And so it sort of approaches the topic of buy-in in the middle, but it sounds to me like the middle was more stable for you at DEA during your time so far.
It was. I mean, we struggle with many of the challenges, like you, our senior leadership who are 1811 special agents. They have mandatory retirement, and so we have a similar challenge. But what I will say, sort of, because there was so much, turnover at the top, by sort of in context for everyone over the 6 years. We now have a confirmed administrator, but I also went through 5 acting administrators in that time. And that was quite a lot. Once you sort of understand one person's, sort of priorities, it shifted. And so it really was quite important to sort of leverage those folks who were in that next level down of senior leadership positions. And for me, it was a lot about, and there's a question in here about sort of how did you leverage the culture that was there? Part of our culture was there was already a bit of a battle rhythm for the ways in which they met and communicated. Our special agents in charge, we call them SACs, they meet twice a year for a SAC conference where they exchange ideas. they also have a SAC advisory committee. And this group meets regularly to identify challenges and elevate them to the headquarters level, to senior leaders. And so figuring out that rather than sort of bringing in a whole other layer of meetings, it is, it has been more beneficial culturally to recognize that this is their forum. This is the way in which they meet and the way in which they share information. And we've been really fortunate. We've been invited to we are sort of the only non-agent, non-1811 member of the SAC advisory committee. And so I get to meet with them once a quarter, and I just take notes and get a lot of homework on, risks that they're seeing and areas where they're worried. And so I'm able to sort of then take that back. And so that's been great to have that buy-in, but a lot of it has been meeting them where they're at, figuring out what's the most comfortable format for them. I'll sort of stop for a second and come back, because there are a couple of questions in the chat. One, Catherine, I'll give it to you, is how is ethics training handled in your organization, and how are topics delivered and developed?
So we now, as of the past few years, we train every single employee every year on ethics. And we do that through a variety of ways. We have some videos that are available for them to watch to fulfill the requirement. We also have every week online, we have a presentation, and we go in person to many divisions to their all hands meetings to get that done. And our managers have required that it be 100% compliance every year. And what's interesting is we get to about 98.6 pretty easily, and that last 1.4% is the real challenge, but we get it done. And we cover a variety of topics, including conflicts of interest, all the standards of ethical conduct, gifts, and all of that, financial disclosures. I would say our two highest, the two topics that we get asked about the most are outside employment and activities, which is a real distinction from the private sector, because especially our special agents, they are extremely limited in the kinds of outside employment that they can have, and including outside activities. But all staff are in at DOJ. You can't be involved in legal matters before the government. There's just a lot of restrictions on that. And then I would say a second major topic for us is post-government service, because everyone, when they leave, they have restrictions, and they really need advice as they go out the door so they don't run afoul of those rules. So those are two top topics for us. We also train every single employee during their first week on the job. We train people on ethics when they're going to be deployed in foreign countries, and we just have a whole host of training that we do. And what's really been good to see is that as we've rolled out this annual training, the number of questions we get is going up, which is exactly how it should be. The purpose of the training isn't for anyone to memorize the rules. It's so they can issue spot and they know when to call us. And we've had a 29% increase in the number of calls that we're getting I think in part as a result of this ethics training. So it's been really successful.
That's great. So I see that we are down to our last 3 minutes. And so I'll sort of give, I'll give a moment or two on what I would sort of say for me are sort of the biggest lessons learned and the key takeaways. And then Catherine, I'll ask you to close us out.
Thank you.
So for me, the lesson in moving from one sort of, I'll say sort of startup compliance program to get to starting up a compliance program, for me is that I had to learn that one size doesn't fit all, that there were some real sort of key core pillars that I could take with me. But ultimately, I then had to kind of move into listening mode and learn the culture of the new organization and what their needs might be. I learned, as you know, that quick wins matter. The ability to sort of identify sort of what was frustrating them and what I could do to sort of solve some of the problems of the day. Putting policy into the hands of our employees, making things sort of clearer, and having a team that sort of approach things in that way. We see ourselves as facilitators, as those who are there to help the organization and be of service to the organization and those who are working in it. And then the last thing is just sort of like to recognize that sometimes I can put all the right pieces in place, but if the process is wildly inefficient, nobody's going to follow it. So Catherine and I were talking earlier about this. I read a great article once that talked about college campuses and how a lot of college campuses, when they build those sort of, the big sort of green, the mall in between the buildings, they've learned to lay the grass, but not necessarily lay the sidewalks. And they wait to see where the students walk. And those paths, they then pour the sidewalks. And to me, that is sort of a lesson that I've tried to take with me, which is I need these foundations, but I can let them kind of guide me down what their sidewalks need to look like. And so that's been sort of the biggest lesson for me. So Catherine, in our last minute.
Okay, I would say that one of the biggest lessons I've learned is our program is voluntary, and in order to have people participate and identify the tough risks, which is really at the heart of the process, to begin the process, you've got to enroll people, you've got to really help them understand the value that you're providing. And so that's one of the things that I think I didn't expect would be the case, that I would be, really selling the program a lot,
Yeah.
but that is really a key component, and it's about relationships and person to person, really having that great communication.
I agree. Very well said.
Thank you so much for your time and attention today. We do
Thank
have
you
our
all.
contact information that we're going to put up, and feel free to contact us directly if you'd like to learn more about what we do or have further conversation. We'd love to hear from you.
Yes. Thank you all. Thanks for taking your time. Have a happy and healthy and safe weekend.